Good morning, everybody. I'm Love Coach Scott Catamas, and you are watching my Sacred Sunday show. And I'm so grateful that I get to have time with TJ Woodward. TJ's with us today again, and we're doing kind of part two of really talking about the most important challenges that many of us face, dealing with depression, addiction, compulsion, how to manage pain, how to manage emotional, psychic, spiritual pain. And we are going to be also listening to a pre-recorded video I did with Reverend Michael Beckwith, who's a good friend of TJ's and someone I've had the good fortune to know for many decades. And we always like to open it up to all of you, whether you're watching live on Facebook or whether you are in our Zoom room. Please give us your thoughts, your comments, questions. We might actually bring some people on camera with us. I've been doing that recently and I really enjoy it. So I'm going to duck out and make sure that everything's going well technically with our other pages. And I'm going to turn it over to TJ for a moment to, and by the way, let me introduce TJ for any of you who don't know. He is the founder, creator behind Conscious Recovery, which is a really powerful next step in really combining conscious awareness with the challenges of recovery, of dealing with our addictions. We all have addictions. We all have compulsions. It might be too much Haagen-Dazs vanilla ice cream at the end of the day, or it might be something that maybe has more significant ramifications in one's life. But we all have to manage and keep reevaluating. Okay, what are my patterned reactions? And TJ is brilliant at helping us to lovingly, compassionately understand ourselves. He's my coach. He's who I work with when I'm hitting challenging times. So with no further ado, welcome TJ. I'm putting the spotlight on you.
Oh, thank you, Scott. And thank you for that introduction. I'm incredibly grateful to be here. And I love this conversation. And I've really been reflecting since our last show. Of course, we love Dr. Michael Beckwith and his incredible wisdom. So we're grateful that we're going to be looking at and listening to an interview that was pre-recorded where he does talk about addiction. And where I believe where we left off, if my memory serves me, we did start the conversation of the difference between pain and suffering. And I love that because there's one mind, right? And I write about that in Conscious Recovery. And it's a pretty important point because addiction in its simplest form in some way is running from, managing, or in some way wanting to numb out pain. And so I often say if addiction is running from pain, then recovery is creating a space where we can learn how to be present with it. Now, in Conscious Recovery and Michael Beckwith, and I know, Scott, you too, we differentiate pain and suffering. And it's important because many of us believe that we need to suffer. But suffering, at least on some level, is a choice. Suffering usually involves a story, an idea, a collection of perspectives, and it usually relates in some way to the pain. So at this point in our conscious evolution, and this might change at some point as we evolve, but at this point, being born on planet Earth comes with painful situations. So recovery is learning how to be present with it without going into suffering. And suffering is usually a story we attach to the pain. One framework that works really well for me is, what would I be experiencing without a story? And so to be present with the sensations in the body, to be present with the pain that we are experiencing is the greatest paradox, because as we sit with and learn how to navigate or be present with our pain, we do come out the other side, and the cliche that's so powerful is the only way out is through. And if you're anything like me, you maybe have spent months, years, even decades trying to avoid, sidestep, go under the pain, go over the pain, around the pain, or you've moved into suffering. And suffering sometimes sounds like this. This shouldn't be happening. I shouldn't be experiencing this. Why does this keep happening to me? That's a very popular one. So we relate to the pain by going into a story. And I think that really is us trying to manage or escape from the pain. So recovery really is, in its simplest form, learning how to be present with what is externally and internally, including the emotions related to what we consider to be pain.
Beautifully. It's such an incredibly important part. And, thank you for talking about pain. And I happen to have it queued up to Reverend Michael talking about pain. So let's take a look at what the Reverend has to say, and then we'll come back and chat. Here we go.
And so, one, for those who are trying to recreate a high, it'll never happen. You'll never get that high again. You'll after your first hit, whether it's cocaine, whatever it is, it never happens again. And your body would need more and more and more and more, obviously, to get some modicum of what you call a high. So that kind of addict needs to be reminded that they're in search of themselves. The elusive high is the elusive real self. And whether you hit rock bottom or whether any of these words that we say gives you an insight, begin to pursue a different path that's going to bring you to yourself. If you're trying to avoid pain, in the human experience, pain is inevitable. It's inevitable. Somebody's going to die. Somebody's going to lose a job. There's going to be a downturn in the economy that's going to affect people. There's going to be breakups in relationships. No one goes through the human experience unscathed by the dynamics of death and loss or ill health. Even if it's not your ill health, maybe it's the ill health of a beloved friend, you see. So we're not gonna avoid it, you see. The idea is that we have to embrace it as an inevitable part of the human experience, but embrace it in a way that allows us to totally embrace it so that we have moments of transcendence, not avoiding, not burying it under the rug, not pretending it's not there, but it's a total embracing. So if tears need to be shed, tears can be shed. If in fact someone needs to cry, someone needs to cry. If someone needs to temporarily release energy by hitting a pillow, then someone needs to temporarily release that energy by hitting a pillow. You're not going to get through human experience without the pain. We can get through the human experience without long-term suffering, because suffering is the story we tell ourselves about the pain. You see, we tell ourselves, this shouldn't have happened. We go into wishful thinking. If I only woulda, shoulda, coulda, if I would have done this, then this wouldn't have happened. Or if she hadn't done this, then that wouldn't have happened. We come out of wishful thinking and we get rid of the story of what could have happened and didn't happen, realize total acceptance. Whatever happened, happened. This person left me, or I had to leave this person, or I got fired, or whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
Total acceptance of it. And then from total acceptance, we're able to harvest lessons that we're learning. And then we're able to go into deep moments of forgiveness of ourselves and anyone else involved, so that we're not trying to run from the pain, but we're not trying to create a story around it that leads to long-term suffering, you see. And this
It's so rich. TJ, how do you personally, before we talk about how we do it in coaching, how do you personally deal with your emotional pain?
Well, it's interesting. I love what Michael is saying. And I think there are multiple different conversations we can have. And I love your question. How do I personally navigate or work with pain? It starts with something that Michael pointed to that is very, very important. First, I notice, I'm aware that I'm aware if I'm creating a story. And again, I said this and then Michael said it, perfect. There is one mind, that we often go into a story, and the story can be an escape hatch, right? If I start going into what could, what if, why didn't I should have, then we're escaping from it. So to the best of my ability, I'm aware of the thought. I don't try to change the narrative. And I think that's an important distinction for me, because in my years of working with clients, and certainly in my own journey, I realized that I had a pretty aggressive relationship with my thoughts, and I wasn't aware of it. And the aggressive nature, or the aggressive relationship with the thoughts, was me trying to always change my story and pushing up against it. And then at some point I heard, or it came in meditation, I don't know where it emerged, there's a dramatic difference between changing the narrative and recognizing the narrative. A difference between letting go of the story or living beyond the story. And when I understood that, then I recognized I could reconnect with my true nature and witness the story. And from there, from that connection, then I can be present within my body. The emotion is actually a sensation in the body, right? It might show up as a warmness in the heart. It might show up as tightness in my throat. It might show up as some sort of clenching. You know, Michael talked about sometimes we need to beat a pillow to get that energy out, right? So it's stuck energy in somewhere. When I can look at it without judgment, allow the stories to come and go. And then, as I said earlier, what am I actually experiencing? Oh, I notice there's a sensation in my heart space. Put my hand on my heart and allow that to emerge, allow myself to have the experience. Notice if I go into a story, allow that story to float away, go back to the actual sensation. I remember at one point, I woke up one day with a lot of sadness, and I said to someone in my life, wow, I'm feeling really sad. And this person, really well-intentioned, started asking me, well, what do you think that sadness is about? What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do with it? Right? He was going into solutions about how I could move out of the sadness. And I said something to him that was really a reminder for me. Oh, I don't need to do anything with the emotion or the sensation of sadness. I'm simply going to allow myself to feel it. That is my commitment today. I simply notice, oh, wow, I notice these sensations in my body, and then I breathe into them and then allow them to be present, allow myself to be present with the emotion, and then just notice what happens. And if I can notice with curiosity instead of judgment, I can go a long way with that. And then I realize, oh my gosh, in some way I've been running from the human experience for so long. And when I actually meet it with love and compassion, it's actually, you know, someone said something so powerful to me when I did a session with them. They said, I didn't realize I could do that. And they were talking about being present with themselves. And that line is so powerful. I didn't realize I could be present with myself. I didn't realize I could let myself feel.
Beautiful. That inspires the memory of a story that captures that, and then I want to riff on it. I was having this conversation with a friend of mine about how we stuff our feelings and how when someone else is sad, we have that tendency to want to fix it and make it better. And he told me the story about how he had taken his niece out for an ice cream cone. So they get their ice cream, they walk outside, it's a hot sunny day. She gives it a lick and the whole thing falls and splatters on the sidewalk. And she looks down at this melting ice cream and she starts to cry. And my friend leans down and he says, don't worry, don't cry, don't cry. I'm going to buy you another one. She looks at him and she goes, I know you will. I'm still mourning this one.
So beautiful.
There it is, right? It is. And it's a wonderful reminder for all of us. When someone around us is having uncomfortable emotions or feelings, manage our discomfort with their discomfort. And a reminder, there's no such thing as bad feelings. There's no such thing as negative emotions. They're not good or bad. They are uncomfortable. They are uncomfortable. And then it triggers discomfort within ourselves. Yeah. So we've got to manage that impulse, want to fix it, don't cry, right? That, you know, or it's okay, let me make it better. How much of that is genuine care for the other And how much of that is, oh God, you're bumming me out and I want to stop it. Right.
Yeah, and you're speaking to another point that I think is great within that story, and that is it's innate within us. See, like she hadn't been taught yet, or we were domesticating her, right? And your friend, and it's, it's not conscious, and we all do it. I remember hearing myself say something to my nephew, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm part of domesticating him. So compassion, forgiveness, acceptance, and it's innate within. She wanted to just allow herself to grieve, right? And so that's our natural state. As a matter of fact, what we're seeking in a spiritual practice is what's actually innate in a very young child: feeling our feelings, moving through them, communicating. I remember my nephew sat on my lap one time and said, Uncle TJ, you have bad breath. And it's like, he's just telling me that's just the truth, right? But and then someone in the room's like, oh, that's not nice, don't say that, right? And I'm not suggesting we walk around saying that to each other, but there's an innate presence and comfort with being authentic that we get taught out of us at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really want to read comments and even include some of you. Charlotte writes, such wisdom and truth. Thank you, TJ. I'm still learning to honor and be with my emotions. And then she appreciates the story. And yeah, being able to just sit in discomfort. And that leads to something else I want to say, and then we'll go back to Reverend Michael for a bit. But just radical acceptance. Yeah. Radical acceptance. It is the great non-denominational spiritual practice for us all. Learning how to be present, how to just be present with what is. And sometimes what is sad. Sometimes what is uncomfortable. And learning how to sit with that and move with it and to dance with it, as opposed to stuffing it, judging it, making it wrong. And that's, I think, we'll probably talk a little bit more about that. But I'm going back to Reverend Michael for a minute.
This is not, it's not playtime. This is all work.
Yeah.
This is really introspection. This is real work, that one has to take on. And sometimes we want to take the easy way out. We want to drink something. We want to smoke something. We want to pop a pill. We want to do something to take the easy way out, only to discover that when that stuff wears off, we're still there.
Yeah.
Whatever happened still happened.
Yeah.
So it's not about running from our problems. It's about embracing them, a full on feeling whatever it is we have to feel about it. And then we're alone. And in that moment of aloneness, we get a light, we get an insight, we get this is going to pass. This is not going to be my forever. My forever is not going to be a song about how this person died or left me, or the job I lost, or the account that I lost, or the body temple that failed me. No, this is an experience. You see, again, help may be necessary. So anyone who's going through addiction, either through trying to catch the elusive high, or trying to avoid pain and making it a compulsive behavior, there's nothing that's going to satisfy until you actually open the door and be with the pain and be with whatever happened. If you made the biggest mistake in your life, that's what happened with me. Many years ago, I made a big mistake. Well, I thought it was a mistake at the time. And I was like, oh, I'm checking out. I'm getting out of here. And then it was like, no, you're not. You're not going to do this. And my life unfolded beautifully.
So TJ, I know that you also had a very big life-changing event a long time ago. And I was reminded of that as I was listening to his story. And just a reminder, even Reverend Michael, we maybe put him up on a pedestal because he's a pretty highly evolved being with a lot of success, but he also goes through it. TJ, do you want to share your story?
Well, there are many I could share, but I think the one you're referring to is actually in around, let's see, 2005 through 2010. It was an interesting period of my life. I had a very successful business. In many ways, I had been on a trajectory of outer focused reality. And I want to say something about that because Michael pointed to it, and I love that he did. When I'm out of touch or disconnected from my true nature, in other words, when I have forgotten the truth of who and what I am, I seek the world to bring that experience to me. And I actually believe that's at the core of addictive behavior. It starts with, as Michael said, there's this high that I experience, but what we're really desiring is the experience of our true nature. That's really where that's the root of it. And so I had, in some ways, lost touch with that. And then I had the calling to go into ministry, to go back to school, become a spiritual counselor, coach, and all the different, write my book. And all of that was coming through. I had the calling to become a spiritual teacher. And at that moment, when I said yes to that, everything that wasn't like it started to crumble. Loss of business. My partner left me, lost my house, lost my car, filed bankruptcy. And I found myself at a really dark period. And I love what Michael said, because if you notice, he didn't say no matter what's happened to you. He did say something like that, but he also said the things that you have done that you might think are the worst things possible. I had gotten into a pattern that created my harming myself and others. And it was because I had disconnected from my true nature. So when I had this deeper calling to do work in the spiritual realm, in other words, my consciousness was gently nudging, there's a deeper reality here. And when I said yes to that, all the behavior that I had been doing, which was outer seeking, started to crumble. I went into a period that we could call the dark night of the soul, and I'm not going to get into all the details. I've done whole shows on the details of it. The bottom line is I had to meet myself in a very, very deep way, and I had to take the time to move toward that pain and through that pain instead of looking for the escape hatch, right? How do I get out of this? And there was a moment where I was in the fetal position and I was alone with myself, with my thoughts and my emotions for 72 hours. I didn't leave my home. I closed all the curtains, and I knew that that was the transformational experience. And Michael just spoke to that. If I move through it, when I move through it, there's transformation on the other side. And in New Thought, we call it chemicalization, right? A new level of consciousness feels like it's pushing up against the old, and it chemicalizes, or it has a profound transformational experience or effect, and it can be really painful. And on the other side of that is a level of freedom where I could have compassion for myself. Yes, I had plenty of stuff I had to clean up, in this earthly experience, but my true nature, my essential beingness, that had never been harmed, and it was unharmable. And so when I came to that and I recognized that really I had been carrying these stories of guilt and shame and blame, and when I got through that, the profound experience on the other side was quite remarkable.
That was the story that I was referencing. I remember the 3 days in fetal position.
Yeah.
And a few times you've referenced accessing our true nature. And some people might call it the higher self. Some people call it the observer. Some people call it God.
Yeah.
So for people that are watching, they kind of have a connection to that part of themselves. Let's celebrate. That's a blessing to have that connection. For anybody watching who's had that connection but maybe lost touch with it, a reminder to take the time, whether it's through meditation or yoga or more walks in the woods, whatever it is, to shut down the distractions and to get back in connection with that part of yourself, the higher self, the true nature. Take the time to do it. It's about the most important thing we can do. Yogananda used to say, everything else can wait. The search for God, or in this case, the search for true nature, cannot wait. But for people that haven't accessed that, or haven't had that experience, maybe they had too much of an indoctrination when they were young, that has to do with religion, and then they understandably broke away, and probably intelligently broke away from the religion they were raised with because they saw the hypocrisy or whatever it was. And so then they're living in this kind of, disconnected place. And I have some clients and friends that I know that are in that place and that I've worked with that are in that place. And I'll maybe share more about that in a moment, but I'd love to hear from you, TJ. What are your suggestions for people who are nope to religion, but haven't found their own true nature or access to that? What would you recommend?
I'll start with something that may sound foreign to someone, and that is, this is not a seeking, it is a remembering. And I'll share what I mean by that, because in my 20s and in my 30s, I was seeking. I was looking for an experience. I was trying to chase something, right? And I was sober, and I was in recovery, and I was on a spiritual path, and I had a meditation practice, but there was a point of view that I thought I needed to attain something. And then at some point, I recognized that the search is actually a remembering, the remembering of the truth of who and what we are. And so I start with that because I think it is important to recognize that so many of us, maybe we did reject our religion or a spiritual path. And I do think it's important, and there's an exercise that I often offer people. It's in the Conscious Recovery Workbook, even in my Conscious Being Workbook, where you, for yourself, write out your definition of religion and spirituality. Look at how they're different or the same or similar for you, and then ask yourself, do I want either one of these? And then start looking. For myself, I didn't have a religion that was very destructive for me, but I did have one that said God is up there and out there, and you need to find, and it was a hymn, all of that. I had all that program. And so for me, the idea that the spiritual journey was one of remembering rather than one of finding or seeking, that in itself was profound, because then I realized I could call off the search and rest in what has always already been there. And then for me, the path became about carving out time to experience that sensation or that knowing that's within me, that energy field that I am. And then I also recognized that I needed to start questioning all of the programs that had kept me from experiencing it.
Beautiful. I knew that if I tossed you that pitch, you'd hit it out of the park. I love what he says about remembering, because deep down, if we dive deep enough, or you could say if we go high enough, either way, we remember. I've done a lot of shows on near-death experiences, and quite often people, when they're out there, remember, oh my God, I'm a multidimensional being. Oh my God, my earth life is just a fraction of who I am. It's a relatively short experience, and sometimes people are shown that by Jesus or their dead, deceased, beloved, but often they remember it. And I want to say that was my awakening. My awakening happened when I was a teenager, and it's a small group. I can be honest about it. But to be honest, it was the first time I took LSD. I was with my best friend. We took LSD, and I remembered, oh my God, this is just like just part. And I remember that it's all about love. And I was 16. I was a teenager, and I was an actor, and I was intense, and I wanted to, and I had all this intensity. And that's when I kind of remembered, oh, it's all about love. Which I'm really grateful for. And my life has been about learning how to live in love and be love as best as I can.
Wow.
So there is that thing about remembering. And we'll go back to Reverend Michael in a moment, but I just want to acknowledge the beauty of what TJ is saying. and how important it is for us to be able to access our true nature, our higher self, our God self.
Wow.
And for people that are more in a religious and appreciate a religious pathway, that's beautiful as well. Most of the people I work with are in crisis, and the people who have faith, either a religious faith that they really believe in, that's experiential for them, or people who have learned how to access, to remember that true self. The challenge isn't greater, but the ability to manage the challenge is so much greater when we do have faith, when we do have a spiritual practice, when we do have that ability to access. So it's really important to cultivate, to depending on where you are in your journey, to discover it and then to cultivate it. Anything else you want to say about that, teacher?
Just thank you. And when we have the near-death experience, and as you said, you recognize you touched reality, right? That's reality. And even in your experience, and it's interesting that it's LSD you're talking about, right? Because what that does is it can take down all the barriers, and then we can experience the truth. And, of course, in the work that I do, which is addiction work, we can get addicted to the substance thinking, oh, I must take LSD to experience it. I love that you're sharing that, because we do have these profound experiences. We touch reality. When people have near-death experiences, something happens, they realize, oh, there's no death. There's only love. And every spiritual teacher, in one way or another, has been pointing to the truth that love is all there is. And all the rest really is just static. And then when we tune into the frequency of love, if you remember the old school radio, oh, I can see clearly now. When Michael Beckwith, one time I heard him speak, and he said, we don't have past lives, we have past chapters. And that it shot through me, because there's one life. And when someone has a near-death experience, they understand that they're not afraid of death, and then they can start living in a very, very different way.
Yeah, absolutely. Since I brought up LSD, and you riffed on it for a moment, I would say that was me. I mean, I was 16, I took LSD. And LSD, by the way, is lysergic acid dichloramente 25, and it's a truth serum. It was developed as a truth serum, and it literally helps us to access a deeper truth. That's why, some people, if their reality is a bad reality, they have a bad trip. If the reality is loving or safe, they have a good trip. I began being 16, of course, that I was like dropping acid like crazy.
Right.
Like Reverend Michael said, trying to, access that first high, right? And then finally I realized, okay, I got it. And I read enough spiritual books that said, thou shalt not rely on drugs to get there, right? So after hearing it from enough spiritual teachers, it's like, okay, and I stopped taking LSD. And it was interesting. I took it maybe 10 years ago to see what it was like, and it was cool, but the next morning I was like, I really don't think I need to do that again. I'm done with that approach, and that was maybe 8, 9, 10 years ago. But there are many ways to wake up. Many ways to wake up. All right, let's go back to the Rev. And people in the chat box, we want to hear from you. So please, on Facebook or in our chat box, thoughts, comments, questions, what's alive for you? Let us know.
After that, but I had to make that choice, you see, to just face the consequences. Yeah.
I remember, I don't know if that's what you're referencing, but I remember you telling the story of the early days of Agape, the young man who wanted to help. You had a Cadillac that had been donated.
Yeah.
Young man who wanted to help and broke into the auto shop to get the part.
Yeah, that wasn't it, but that was a moment where I had suffered tremendous guilt.
Yeah.
Because the young man had asked me, could he fix my carburetor? And I said, I was thinking I would do it. And then a real live angel appeared behind him with big wings and everything, and went like this, no. And I went to the other side of the car, thinking that the sun was shining in my eyes and I was hallucinating. And he kept, Mr. Beckwith, please, I'm going to do a good job. I'm not going to charge you that much money. And the angel appeared again. He said, no. And I said, no, I can't do it. And he just begged me. And I didn't say no. I said, well, maybe, let me think about it. That's what I said. Even though I had an angel. And the next day when I came to the office, everyone was crying. And I said, what's wrong? And he'd been shot and killed by a night security guard at an auto parts store. And my assumption was that he was breaking into this auto parts store to get a part for my car so he could fix my car. And I was feeling very guilty about that because my no wasn't strong enough. Mm-hmm. I said maybe when I should have said no. So yeah, there was some, I felt guilty for a while, and I had to finally let go of the guilt. I mean, he made his choice about breaking in. Security guard made his karmic choice about shooting somebody that was stealing an unarmed person for stealing an auto part. You know what I mean? He made his choice of killing a human being, you know, and I eventually allowed the guilt to transmute itself into stronger yeses and stronger nos in my life. But what I was referencing was way before, that wasn't an agape experience. That was an organization we had put together called the Golden Age Senior Citizen Resort. And we were hiring young kids to be around the seniors at risk, it used to be called at-risk kids, to help them come into employment. And what I was referencing was a time in which I had gotten arrested as a young man in college, you know, for selling weed. And it was a really big bust. And I was just thinking, I had a moment of, you know, what I was facing. Just check myself out of here. And then I said, no. And I was in the middle of a spiritual awakening, my first big spiritual awakening as an adult, that it happened, and it was happening prior to the bust. The bust was my last deal because I'd had this awakening. So I was not in the game anymore. And I was telling the guy that this is my last time I'm ever doing this. And that's when I got arrested on my last deal. And it was embarrassing I thought at the time it was embarrassing to my family and all the things I stood for, and graduating from USC and psychobiology major, you know, it was a whole thing. Yeah. So I know what the suicidal thought is, you know.
Yeah. I'm really appreciating your sharing that on a personal level, because it is important for people to recognize that, you know, you're not just this great spiritual teacher who hasn't gone through this stuff, but you are talking from your own experience. And even with that story, you know, so they make questions. You know, it's always the last bank job, right? You know, it's always the last stand, right? But it's almost as though, just as I hear you tell the story, it was like life saying, "Hey, you've made a big choice," and what an exclamation point to that choice that you made.
Absolutely. And there was no turning back in my life. When I woke up, which is what that was, I woke up, I was killed in a lucid dream, and I could see 365, you know, as I'm seeing in consciousness. The presence of love and beauty was just all through me. And I could never, and to this day, cannot unsee what I saw. This presence is real. That's why, as I'm speaking to you, I'm not speaking from book knowledge, even though I've read a lot of books. I'm speaking from a direct knowing.
Yes.
Of that every single life is precious. Every single life is the light. Every single life matters and has meaning and significance. And then we're supposed to discover that. And the difficulty is that individuals have been trained to come into alignment with their happiness being outside of themselves, or life looking a certain way. And when life doesn't look that way, then the happiness diminishes, sadness emerges. If it's there too long, it can become depression. And if depression is there too long, and then suicidal fantasies can emerge. Once we understand that life is, it's phenomenal. I mean, it's always, the world of phenomena is always swirling, and we learn to develop other muscles to deal with it. I mean, in life, it's not a cakewalk. I mean, today, I'm in the process of reconstructing my house I'm about to move back into. I'd leased it, and it was pristine. It was a pristine home that we leased out. My daughter really put this house together wonderfully, and we leased it out to this gentleman who checked out all the boxes of a good tenant, and he turned the house into a marijuana grow house. Totally ruined my house. And so it's taken a long time to get it back with the COVID restrictions and trying to get permits. And it's taken a long time. In the last 2 days, my house has been burglarized twice. You know, they stole my bicycles. They stole all the stuff in the living room. They came back last night and stole more stuff. And that stuff happens, you know? So it's like, how am I going to respond to this? So I'm talking to the police officer. We're filling out police reports. And my thought these days are, you know, it's stuff. The people are desperate. It's stuff. What's the most valuable thing that they took from me was my time, because I had to stop what I'm doing, to go over here, talk to the plate, make a police report, fingerprinting. People come over to do the fingerprints. As I gotta go back again. They robbed me again, you know. But they're just robbing stuff. I'm going to replace the stuff. But my time is very precious. You know, that happened today.
Wow.
Okay? That's today when I discovered that, you know. And, but did they touch me? No, they didn't touch me, you know. And I have tremendous compassion. You know, I guess my pet peeve are thieves. It's a pet peeve. I don't like people who steal from other people. You know, it just creates havoc for people that are just trying to make it out here. And then you're going to break into their house and steal their stuff, you know. Do something else with your creativity. I know you're desperate, but in your desperation, let a new ideal emerge, you know. You know, I'm being a little coy, but you know.
Yeah, no, it was amazing that I happened to catch him at a time when he was having, you know, my motto, a perfectly human experience. And I appreciated that I happened to catch him on that day, you know, so we could see a very perfectly human Michael, but yet still applying his spiritual principles, his way of thinking and being to a perfectly human and very annoying pair of experiences. What comes up for you in watching that, TJ?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. I want to touch on the story about having his home broken into, but I really want to go back to the story before that because there's so much power in it. The thing he said about his house being broken into that I thought was so powerful is, and you know, this is a paraphrase, we just heard him say it, that they didn't harm me, right? And to remind ourselves, to remind myself that my true nature is unharmed and unharmable, and to understand experientially, not conceptually, to understand the nature of reality, which is what I have and who I am are two very different things. And so if someone steals something from me, or I perceive that they did, because first of all, we don't really own anything anyway. It's a construct that we've created, but there's a place within me that can never be harmed. And then it puts it into perspective, right? It puts it into perspective, and I don't have to go into a story of why did they do it? Should I have changed the locks? Why is this happening to me? All of those things that we could do that Michael talked about much earlier in the interview. But I really want to go back to the first story because he said something so incredible. When he talked about, I reached a point when I couldn't go back. And what I love about his story is it's so parallel to my story that I told earlier. He had this awakening, this experience of awakening. And then there was this place where he's like, oh, I'm just going to do this one more time. Right. And that one more time, it's not a coincidence that we perceived that he got busted. Right. And I love that he's willing to share that, because like me, I think that our stories, our experiences are actually so much more powerful than anything we could share from our mind, right? So Michael said, I've read plenty of books, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm going to share my experience of touching reality. And when he had the experience of knowing very deeply the truth of who and what he is, and then yet one more time, oh, I'm just going to do this one more time. That was my experience, right? And then the universe is so kind, because the universe will give us the experience. And I don't mean from a good, bad, right, wrong place. Because sometimes I hear people, like, for example, using the term the cosmic 2x4. And I think that's just redressing the old paradigm of a punishing God, right? So I don't think the universe punishes us. And when I have an experience of, oh, this is the nature, he talked about, there were these moments I knew that there was only love, right? That's love. And, Scott, you talked about that and your experience when you were 16. And then, of course, there's no coincidence that you have Love Coaching Academy, right? Because you understand, not intellectually, but experientially, oh, what we're really here to do is to radiate this love into the world. And then the rest, if I have an old idea of, oh, I need to grab on to, or I need to go back to this behavior, it just isn't going to work, because as Michael said, I had reached a point where there was no turning back, but a part of me still wanted to turn back. So the universe is very kind and loving, will always give us the experience that we need. And I think Pema Chodron says life will continue to show us what we need to learn, right? And then until we don't, and then it's like, oh yeah, I can release those strategies and I can rest in this greater reality. And then I can understand my purpose here, which is each and every one of us have the purpose of radiating love into the world. And when we get that experientially and we understand that, life changes. Life changes dramatically. And then it becomes this great adventure of all the different ways that we can serve the world. We shift from what we want to get from the world to what we want to offer the world. And that is a completely different way of being.
I just want to acknowledge everything you said, Chris, is so wise. But again, my experience is that absolutely life does not punish us.
Right.
But sometimes there's, as Ram Dass would say, fierce grace.
Yeah.
And sometimes there are, in the desire for us to learn our lessons of self-love, our lessons of awakening, there is fierce grace. And I think what it is, the thing, the universe wants to get your attention, so you get a gentle shove, then you get a push, then you get the 2x4 is how I've heard it. And it's not a punishing God or life. It's a, hey, really want you to see this, really want you to get this. And I can even acknowledge in my life, with the things that I've known I need to change or do different, there's that part of me that sometimes wonders, well, how much can I get away with before life is going to say, all right, enough, everybody out of the pool, right? Take a time for a timeout. I mean, I've had that going on inside my consciousness. Can I get away with this? There's something, I kind of like getting away with things, right? And then the universe is a patient mother until finally it's like, oh, that's it. Nope, enough. So I don't know if anybody else can relate to that.
Yeah, and I'm reminded of the framework that we have established in our consciousness around karma. And a lot of times we believe that karma is like, I do something that's bad and something bad happens to me, right? And really, karma is an inner experience, right?
Yes.
It is simply me continuing to carry the same ideas about myself in the world and then re-experiencing that. Because when I understand the nature of reality, that I create what I experience in the world based on my point of view, based on the frequency I'm vibrating from, then I understand that the world is not punishing me, nor is it rewarding me, but my ideas about the world are what create the repetitive experience. And I'm going to be really practical. So I carried a very, very deep belief that I was unlovable. And so I kept choosing these relationships to confirm that. Even though in the outer world or in my behavior, I was, please love me, please love me, please love me. But I walked into a room full of people and I could just unconsciously pinpoint the one person in the room that was going to confirm the core false belief. These were not bad people. This was me choosing them so that I could heal. And the healing looked like, oh, five relationships in a row that these people couldn't love me. And they couldn't love me, not because it was karma or that I had been bad and I was receiving karma, but it was a frequency. And of course, we aligned and we were in a karmic contract of, oh, yeah, let's confirm this. And when I understood that, I understood that karma was an inside job. And as I healed the deeply held core beliefs and the vibration, the frequency, the thought, the emotion, it all stems from that. When I healed that, I had a different experience because I was choosing different relationships. And that's when it becomes exciting and it becomes an experiment. I love what Byron Katie says. We live in a friendly universe. Don't believe me? Try it.
Thank you for sharing that. And I agree. Karma can be cleared the moment we get the lesson. And I think probably the worst dogma was where the quote from the Bible, an eye for an eye, has just been repeated too many times.
Yeah.
And there is this idea of, oh, well, if I hurt you, I need to be hurt in exactly the same way. And then for some people, they're particularly evangelical. It's like, oh, and I have to be hurt 10 times worse. Or if you hurt me, I have to hurt you 10 times worse. And it never ends. As Gandhi said, an eye for an eye makes everyone blind. And karma is something, the moment we get it changes.
Yeah.
I see that a lot in my relationship work when I work with couples, and I call it the holy moment, where a couple is repeating a pattern over and over and over. She gets scared, she gets graspy, he gets scared, he pulls away. The more he pulls away, the more she grasps. A common cycle. No right or wrong, they're both playing their part. When I can lovingly and compassionately point out that it's just a cycle of behavior, and they both are trying to meet their need for safety, when they both get it, there's this holy moment. And you could say the karma ends in that moment because they both see there's no right or wrong. It's not just him or her. Oh, we have this pattern that we do, and we both want to change it. There's the holy moment, and the karma changes. So, and we can have those privately within ourselves, between us and life, us and God. Again, when I say God, I don't mean a man with a white beard. He looks more like TJ, actually. No, I mean life. I mean existence. The one life that TJ and Reverend Michael were talking about. I see what you wrote, Annette, and I'm very troubled by that. And I notice the part of me that wants to jump in and fix it. And a while ago, we were talking about not fixing. So I guess I just want to acknowledge what an incredibly difficult situation that is to be in. And I'm imagining that maybe you feel trapped in your own home. That perhaps you feel helpless to a situation that is not what you want. And so may you really access whatever you can within yourself from a higher perspective, accessing what TJ calls, the true self. Okay, what are the steps that I can take? What are the steps that I can take to take care of myself? And what are the steps that I can take to change the situation? And I just pray for maximum grace for you to have the courage and the insight that you need to manage what is clearly a very difficult situation. All right, we go back to Reverend Michael. I love that I happen to be catching you on a day that you're dealing with some pretty hard personal stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you. And to what degree, I mean, if you don't mind sharing, to what degree do you allow yourself to get pissed? Before, like how do you work with that?
Well, the first burglary, I just happened to notice some stuff in the backyard, and I was wondering how this new stuff got in the backyard. So obviously they'd either got nervous and dropped it, or people were coming and they dropped it, or they were hiding it to come back to get it later. We went in and they had stolen my daughter's bicycle, my bicycle, a Buddha that my mother gave me that's nice. So the value is more personal than financial.
Sentimental value.
Sentimental value. And I just felt like, stuff. Okay. Call the police. They did the thing. Today, when I discovered it, I was a little bit more mad. It's like, come on, But think about it, I knew it, but there was no place to sleep in the house yet. I said I probably should, tie my camel up and do something, But so I had a little bit more anger, and but I mean, I didn't throw anything. I didn't, do anything crazy. It was just like, And then I just went on with my day, and I do what you have to do. You try to close the gate after the horses run out. And bless the house, bless the people. Think to myself, I'm kind of the wrong guy to rob from. I want goodwill for everyone. You know what I mean? You've just walked into a blessing, because as I'm blessing you, this is my blessing is going to help you speed up your own inner reckoning. So maybe you rob my house to get a major blessing, to have circumstances bend upon you to wake you up. I don't know. I'd leave that. That's revenge is mine, saith the Lord, means revenge is mine, saying the law. So I let the law handle it, the little law and the big law, and going about my business, And but I brought those experiences up because things happen in the world of phenomena. There are people out here that are desperate. They're stealing things. Unemployment is high. Homelessness is high. All kinds of stuff can happen. And I can remember the story, as a story that was told about the Buddha. And a woman had a very sick child near death. And she goes into this city, and there's the Buddha teaching. And she knew that he had powers. And she said, "Can you save my child? My child is dying." And he said, "If you can go to any town around here and find anyone who has never suffered loss of any kind, I'll save your child." So she went to the neighboring towns, and there was not one person who hadn't suffered some kind of loss in their life. And in pursuing that question in the different towns, she came to a great understanding that no one goes through the human experience unscathed, and her depth of compassion grew for herself as well. And she realized that, she was dealing with something that many, many people go through: the loss of a kid, loss of a mother, loss of a father, loss of a brother, sister, whatever, a child, which is very intense. And it changed her consciousness. The child didn't make it, but that whole experience brought her to another level of awareness. And I just say that to remind everyone that life, the life experience is swirling. We do our best by having expanded consciousness, doing our inner work, establishing intention, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes you're going to get robbed. Sometimes somebody's going to bump into the back of your car and you're going to be in an accident. Sometimes, you know, the stock market's going to crash. Sometimes somebody's going to call you up and say, you know, I don't think this relationship is working. You know, you know, things are going to happen. And we have to grow to respond in a different way. We can't just build a life on a fantasy thinking that it's going to always be the way we want it to be. Our response has to be a little different.
Whether there's something.
Whew. So incredible. I love, you know, Scott, I so appreciate, and I'm so grateful for you to bring this interview with Reverend Michael to us, because it's so powerful. And I think what he demonstrated, he didn't say this, but what I observed in sharing his process around this robbery was that he didn't go straight to the, I'm going to bless this person. He acknowledged that he had some anger. He didn't go into it, but he allowed himself to feel that and to acknowledge it and to recognize the anger. And if you notice, when he shared about it, he didn't go into a story about the anger, right? Because going back to the beginning of the show, when we talked about the difference between pain and suffering, pain was the experience that he was going through in this thing called life. He allowed himself to have the anger without going into a story like, you know, I'm so evolved, I shouldn't be robbed anymore, right? He allowed himself to be angry. Then he went to the principle of, you picked the wrong person to rob because I know it's a blessing for you. And then the law, the small L law and the big law, will allow that person to have the true karmic experience. Not that the world is going to punish him, but this person might have an opportunity. I mean, can you imagine that story for that person when they wake up and say, yeah, I stole from Michael Bernard Beckwith, and then I had this intense spiritual experience. And, you know, spiritual experiences look different. I love the story about the Buddha and the healing, because so many of us, and I think this really ties the whole story back together around addiction. When I understand reality, when I have touched reality and I understand that in the human experience, because, you know, we talk about being spiritual beings having a human experience, and Michael draws a different distinction, and he says we are human beings having a spiritual beings having a human incarnation. We've come here to deliver spirit into the world, and we, for whatever reason, we have either chosen or we've been assigned planet Earth this time, and it's a pretty dense planet. There's a lot of pain here, and we get to experience that pain so that we can transform and remember our true nature. And even though I don't know what the comment was that you were speaking to earlier, Scott, sometimes the lesson for me is having the courage to leave a situation, having the courage to understand I'm more worthy than being in a situation that's causing me harm. I put myself in all sorts of situations where I was setting myself up to be harmed repeatedly. And I understood that the first step for me was having the courage to step away from that. And then I could start looking at the core false beliefs I was carrying that were creating that, not from a place of blame. Blame is a low level consciousness. Accountability is a step toward a higher level of consciousness, right? I can move out of blame of myself or another. If you notice, Reverend Michael didn't blame the person that robbed him. He didn't blame himself for the kind of lock he put on the door. It's okay, here's this experience. I'm noticing I'm feeling angry, and then I go to the blessing. And so healing the core false beliefs, step out of the blame and into accountability, and then find the inner resources. The inner resources, sometimes the inner resource is courage to get out of the situation so that I can actually start the healing. Because when I'm in the situation, that's true of addiction, that's true of being in an abusive situation. When I have the courage to step out of it and stop the behavior that's causing the harm, and that might be my behavior harming someone or someone that I perceive as harming me, first stop that, find a place where I can move into accountability for myself, and then start the deeper healing. And then I understand that every experience in life is providing me an opportunity to heal.
You know, when you talk about accountability, something that he mentioned very briefly, but he did take responsibility when he says, you know, I should have stayed there the second night. It's like he realized that there was a part of him that he could have made a different choice to go back there, stay the night. And then he kind of jokes on himself, saying, closing the gate after the horses have already run away. And so, you know, he even acknowledged his role in it. Yeah. You know, something that TJ said that I want to reference. All of us have childhood wounding, and wounding as teenagers and adults, and wounding from maybe last week. It's our interpretation of what that wounding means that often sets us up to repeat. It's especially hard for us as children when, as children, we have things take place that a child's brain can't comprehend. Why did daddy leave mommy? You know, why are mommy and daddy screaming at each other? Why is daddy hitting me? Why is mommy not picking me up from school when she's supposed to? And so then our little child mind comes up with, oh, well, it's because I'm a bad boy. Or it's because mommy doesn't really love me. Oh, daddy's leaving because I was a bad child and I've driven him away. Whatever. We make up these stories to understand what our little brain can't understand. And that still happens for us as adults as well, of course. And so that's why it's so important to get coaching or do some form of therapy to look at what are the hard things that have happened in my life and what are my interpretations about that. What did I interpret that to mean? Oh, I interpreted it to mean that I'm bad, or that's just the way men are, or that's how people are going to treat me in love. And as a coach, it's worked with a lot of people now, and so is TJ. That's what I, and I'm imagining TJ as well, we consistently see is people who are trapped by the interpretation of what happened to them. What happened to them came and went. There's a lesson within it, but they're not, but let's not be trapped by the interpretation of what it means. Right? Anything you want to add to that, TJ?
Yeah. And Scott, you and I know that the deeper work is looking at the core decision that we made about ourselves in the world, like you said so beautifully. You know, the child brain isn't developed, and it's very much in duality, right? So if mommy's mad, I must be wrong, right? I get rewarded, I must be good. But these ideas are much deeper than a thought, right? And this is why in a lot of the frameworks, when we say, well, change your narrative, but I don't understand why I can't change the narrative or just choose healthier relationships, right? That's why it's really popular today to talk about getting toxic relationships out of our life, but that's not it. I mean, that's part of it, but why am I choosing that? Not from a place of blame, but then I can get down to when I first decided that, because as Scott said, it's not really what happened, it's what I decided about what happened. And if it were just as easy as understanding the pattern and changing the thought, that most of us wouldn't continue to suffer. We would have the painful experience and move on. In my work, and Scott, I know in yours, we get down to the deeper awareness that at a very tender age, we concretized these beliefs into our subconscious or our unconscious, and it becomes a frequency. And then we're emitting that frequency and replicating this is what I believe I deserve. Right. So we have to get down and have compassion for that 7-year-old, that 6-year-old, that 5-year-old that developed this, and start to heal it from there, not so much in current time. And of course, like we said earlier, sometimes I need to leave a situation. For me, I had to put the drugs and alcohol down. I tried doing therapy while I was using massive amounts of drugs and alcohol, and it didn't really go so well. So I had to first do that. But then the deeper healing was, my gosh, at age 7, I decided the world wasn't safe and that I was broken. And I decided that very, very deeply. It was in my unconscious, and that's where it needed to be healed.
Yeah. So, everybody watching, and I want to acknowledge that the majority of you are going to be watching the replay, because that's most people who watch this show watch the replay. Maybe take a moment, slow down. Just pick one painful thing that's a pattern in your life, and don't look at it that you're bad or you're wrong. This is a pattern. What do I believe? Is there something I believe that in some way recreates this pattern? Is there something I believe? I'm not lovable. I'm not good enough. I'm not fill in the blank enough. And we all have that. We all have those things that, I am not fill in the blank enough about. And what's really helpful, and I want to acknowledge Robert Gonzalez and Marshall Rosenberg, who kind of teamed up to teach this to me, is to add the word. So let's say I have, I'm too old to find love. And that's a story that I struggle with because I've been single for 1.5 years. So if I run the story, I'm just too old to find true love. I'm too old to find the love that I want. I'm reinforcing that. And then that's going to dictate any number of reactions. But if I acknowledge, I'm back in the story that I'm too old to find love. I'm back in that story. It's just a story. Is that a story I really want to reinforce in my life? It's a story. Now, there's pain in the story. There's pain in the stories that we run. And so there's important to mourn, important to grieve. Next week's Sacred Sunday show, next week's Straight Talk show is all about dealing with grief next Friday night. So there is time to grieve. There is time to mourn, but don't keep running the story. That's what TJ pointed out about what he saw with Reverend Michael. Reverend Michael looked at, okay, this is what happened. This is what I could have done differently. This guy's gonna, get his lesson, and I move on with my day. I take care of my business. One last thing that he said, that revenge is mine, saith the Lord. What an important reframe. He reminded us of that. Meaning it's up to life to handle karma. It's up to life to provide revenge, as opposed to you hurt me, therefore I'm now entitled to hurting you. And again, as somebody that works a lot with couples and families, almost always when somebody does something hurtful to another family member or beloved, it's because they feel entitled. You hurt me, therefore I'm going to hurt you back. You did this, therefore I now get to do that. And so it's important for us to look at, when do we play the I'm entitled to do something hurtful because of what happened to me. Maybe the people who robbed Reverend Michael feel entitled to stealing because they lost their job, and it was unfair that they lost their job. Most of the time when we make choices that have hurtful consequences, we feel desperate and or we feel entitled to make that choice. Anything you want to add or riff on?
Thank you for this conversation. I'm so incredibly grateful, and I really appreciate that Michael shared so much of his own story, because it's just so powerful for us to be able to share the events of our life and how they were transformative for us. So I'm just really in the frequency of gratitude right now, Scott, and I'm enjoying it.
We have, on Saturday Night Live, we have a thing called Wisdom Jewels. And by the way, TJ will be our co-host on Saturday Night Live on July 24th, coming up. And one of the wisdom jewels last night was from Rumi, and it said something along the lines of, if you have just one prayer each day, may that prayer be thank you. So, thank you for reminding us of the attitude of gratitude. All right, let's go back for one last little helping of Reverend Michael.
Perfect.
Wrong with me because she's leaving, or I lost a job, or I got burglarized.
That's
When I was like 21, I went to see Krishnamurti speak in Ojai.
Mhm.
And what really stood out is he told the story about how his brother got very sick.
Yeah.
And his brother wanted to live, and Krishnamurti wanted him to live. And because it was
I remember
Krishnamurti, you remember that, right? And so it goes to all the top healers and all the magical people and all of Krishnamurti's powers and all the people he knows. And his brother died.
Right.
You know?
Yeah,
And-
I used to go see Krishnamurti every year up in Ojai. Every year.
Yeah, that's where I went to see him. Yeah.
Yeah, every year. That's what I did. And the part of that story was the fact that he was in tune with what was called the White Brotherhood at the time. These invisible beings that were assisting him, and they guaranteed that his brother would be healed because he wanted to stay. He didn't want to travel. He wanted to stay and nurse his brother. But they told him that his brother would be healed, so he went off. He went to the United States or somewhere to speak. When he came back, his brother had died. And that's when he really began to teach, do not have external authority figures, don't have intermediaries, go direct. Somebody can teach, somebody can inspire, but don't put your whole faith into somebody outside of yourself. You know, so his whole teaching, if you can remember, became very, very stringent in terms of taking responsibility for your own life and going within to discover that, you know, because he had been promised by the brotherhood that his brother would survive, and this brother did not. So yeah, that's a very powerful.
Thanks for adding that part of the story, because I had forgotten about the White Brotherhood part of it. I remembered that he came out of it, you know, with that perception, but I forgot that part of it.
Yeah.
And of course, it was always what I always remember when I go to see him is how frustrated he would get when people would applaud. He said, no, it's not about applause, no. For that very reason, because he didn't want people to give their power away to him.
Right.
Right. So, yeah.
That's why I always say, this path, you know, whether it's agape or you know, the teaching, it's not about followership, it's about spiritual leadership. Mm-hmm. It's about giving the person back to themselves over and over and over again, to give the person back to themselves. And I wouldn't want the burden of carrying people that way. I want to always give them something in which they're able to come to self-discovery, you know, and be empowered. And they can say, thank you. You know, you gave me a word of inspiration. You gave me a prayer. You gave me a teaching. You gave me a practice, you know, but everyone must have a personal revelation of the truth, because no one can ride on the coattails of somebody else's personal revelation. Everyone has to have one for themselves, you see. And so this is what we inspire to do here, you know, create the condition for people to have their own personal revelation of the truth. And because as I've said over the years, that the path is not about just accepting some inherited belief system. It's about experimentation, exploration, and spiritual practice to have direct experience for yourself. You know, not just believing what somebody says, you know. And everything.
Fellowship as opposed to follow.
Right. Fellowship in truth. Absolutely. Yeah. And this is.
Wow, I love that. You know, one of the things that Michael says that I really appreciate is he says, I'm not here to get followers. I'm not here to create followers. I'm here to create leaders. And he spoke to that so beautifully, giving someone the tools, offering someone the tools so they can have their own direct experience. I'm doing a talk next month, and when I create a title for a talk, I go within and listen to some inner wisdom, and then whatever shows up is what I do. And the term spontaneous insight came up as my title, because A wise person once said, it can take a lifetime and it can happen in an instant. In an instant, I can understand the truth. In an instant, I can have the insight. And the insight's not here, it's an insight. Realizing the answers are within me. And I love, of course, I love Krishnamurti and his teaching, and Eckhart Tolle really learned a lot from Krishnamurti. So, that lineage of the spiritual teacher, not let me tell you, don't follow me in my teachings, let me create a space so that we can access our own inner wisdom, and that's, we say we don't offer someone some fish, we teach them to fish, right? And that really is what this is about for us in consciousness, that we recognize that each of us has this own journey within, and yet we have people on our path that help us point us in that direction.
I'm going to read a comment from Annette and Simon, and then a question for you, TJ. Annette writes, someone can be an authority on a subject and their knowledge is valuable, like a scientist, but they do not need to be authoritarian. It's a really lovely distinction, recognizing someone who's an authority, but not turning them into or becoming an authoritarian.
Beautiful.
And so I'm curious for you how it is, and Simon writes, so spot on tonight, from the place I was to now, addiction can be beaten. Thank you, Simon. God bless you for that. So as a coach, this is a coach-to-coach question, but I think it'll be applicable to everyone to appreciate. Riffing on what Reverend Michael talked about, how is it for you when you're working with a client and there's a part of you that knows if they just follow the path that you're laying out for them, they're going to get the results they say that they want, but they're not doing it. How do you manage the different parts of it? The part of you that, of course, can pull back and be sensitive and say, well, when they're ready, they'll learn. So we all know that part. But how do you manage that human part that really wants them to get it? That really maybe does want them to not necessarily follow TJ as a spiritual teacher, but follow your path, follow what you're laying out for them?
Well, I start with questioning every thought I have about it, because is it even true that I know their path? And the greatest freedom for me came when I understood that I actually don't know someone else's path. I can share mine. But the key here, and this is where I think it's really important, the key is they already have everything within them that they need. So I don't even need to hold a perspective that there's a path, because the path is always the same. Now, it's unique for each of us, but it's always the path to remembering our true nature. And so as a coach, my role is not even to necessarily share my path or to point them on a path, but to hold a space and do for them what they might not be able to do in that moment. And that is to help them recognize, and this is energetically, I don't say anything, but to hold the space that they're already there. There's no destination. They already have everything within them for them to discover their true nature, to understand that they can call off the search. So, what my unique journey might not be someone else's. So just to recognize that my mind probably has a perspective. Oh, if they could just do this, they could be, oh, they're so close, right? And then to notice my own thinking. That's really the training with conscious recovery. When I certify someone in the conscious recovery method, it's not about a method of like, you need to learn these key points in conscious recovery and here's the framework. Yes, that's important, but really it's about how do I hold space? And it's not so much I'm holding space for them to follow a path. It's I'm holding space for them to recognize their inherent perfection. And my role is to see that in the moment that they don't see it. And that's what's been offered to me in my journey. And then I rediscover it. And I think maybe I said this even in the last show. I love the way Sue Morter says it. She says, life is challenging and it's difficult until the moment it's not. Right. And that my role as a coach and how I train other people to coach. And again, that's an interesting framework. I don't train anyone to coach, but in the training, if you will, or the learning is really holding space and seeing the perfection in them, and then noticing, do I have any point of view about what they should or shouldn't do? Or like, oh, if they could just get it, working in addiction treatment for a decade, oh my gosh, it can be exhausting if I think someone needs to have a breakthrough. And just, full transparency, I spent a long time in that. And it's a moment to moment, oh, I notice I'm slipping into, oh, I just want her to get this, versus, oh, she's whole and perfect. Let me behold that within her, because the observer has a profound effect. And in the quantum field, we know there are multiple realities happening. And when I tune into one, it comes into manifestation. So my role is to tune in for them in that moment. They might be stuck in a story of suffering, not even to go into the story, but to simply hold space for them.
Beautiful. We're going to wrap up in a couple minutes, but I just want to kind of complete by really riffing on what TJ just shared. It's such a beautiful spiritual practice for us to notice our judgments, especially of ourselves and of others, and to pivot into seeing the divinity instead. And at almost every workshop I teach or big class, I taught a class last week online, and I asked this question: how many of you have had to leave a family or a family member or a dear friend because they had put you in the prison of their judgment? Everyone raised their hand. Almost all of us have had to leave someone we loved because they wouldn't get off their painful story about us. And probably the painful story was because we had done something or behaved in a particular way that didn't meet their values and had an impact on them. But they were still holding on. That's who we were. Right? That's why I don't even like the word addict. And so, and this is not about being Pollyanna, and it's not about sticking our head in the sand. It comes back down to, remember we talked about radical acceptance. Radical acceptance of what is happening right now in the present moment, and still being able to see the divinity. And so what he's describing, we can apply in ourselves, as we see ourselves, or in anyone that we are in relationship to. Accepting exactly where they are in this moment, accepting what's taking place, noticing our judgments, giving ourselves compassion. Don't judge the judge, as Marshall Rosenberg used to teach. Recognize that underneath our judgment are our own unmet needs or our own fear. So we give ourselves compassion for that. And we still see the divinity in life and in the situation and in that person, even when they're not behaving or being the way we want them to be. Easier said than done. Lifetime practice, but a beautiful way to conclude another lovely Sunday with TJ and Reverend Michael. Let's make that our practice this week. Let's really practice it. Again, the steps. Notice the judgment. Drop into profound acceptance of what is, and then still see the divinity. And if you need to, give yourself compassion, empathy, acknowledge your discomfort. Don't stuff it, but you don't have to act on it. And then, can I see the divinity in all? So that's my homework assignment for myself and for anybody who wants to take that on. And TJ, any final thoughts?
Just thank you. I loved everything you just shared, and incredibly practical tool of how we can discover inner freedom. And once I have inner freedom, I have outer freedom, regardless of the situation. Someone doesn't need to change in order for me to be free. Wow. It only took me 3 decades to figure that out, but that's okay. It happens when it happens, right? And then there's that moment, like the spontaneous insight. Oh my gosh, all of us, each of us is whole and perfect. Each of us is a perfect expression of the one power, the one source energy. And when I understand that, and like you said, it's not about will I have judgment, it's when I have judgment, because that's what the mind does. And then have compassion for the judger. Like, oh, look, there I am. what gets created when I do this, and what gets created when I behold the truth for myself and for you. And what I'll close with is very simple. I send out a daily quote every day, and I actually programmed the entire year. I just took one day and it programmed the entire year this year. And so I don't know the quote myself, so it's a gift for myself. And a couple of days ago, Byron Katie quote, and it's so simple. If I like me, I like you.